Today we'll be talking about test cases. What are they? What what the point is, and how they can be used if we get around to it. So, test cases are sort of self-explanatory. Um, they are the item that is used to track and or document the an individual case that that is going to be tested. Uh, this might be very granular and be based on like very specific things within an application or product or feature. Like, does a particular button uh does a particular button take the user to where they're supposed to go, or is the button able to be clicked, or whatever functionality comes from the clicking of that button. It could be very granular in terms of that, or it could be a little more open and free formed, where, or maybe not so much free form, but more open to where instead of specifying specifically uh, that level of functionality, you're a little more general, and you end up creating a test case that might be, does is the user able to navigate to X, whether that's navigate to the home page, which that, yes, technically is specific to where you're going, but in terms of how you then validate off of that test case is going to be very uh could be more granular in terms of like specific items within the test case, because the components of a test case are the name or summary or title or how, whatever system you're using, uh, for what the test case is or what the test case is testing. And then within that, you then have additional information, again, depending on the system you're working within, where you will have additional parameters or other um, other attributes, labeling, however you want to categorize it, whether or not this test case is to be used in certain suites or environments, or whatever the case may be. Then outside of that sort of labeling and categorization and all that, then you would have the actual like steps to execute the test case, which means to run the test case, where you are then walking through the steps, which this is where, again, you can get more granular or less granular in terms of what needs to be communicated to whoever is planning on running the test case. Do you give step by step every single little click and movement and nudge to get to where the setup is, or do you have the setup in some sort of like pre setup step, and then you take the user to the specific uh, spot where they would then be testing something? So like if we use the example of navigating to a home page, then you could then say, um, type in a specific URL, make sure that that URL looks correct. You can validate off of that, which means the thing that is then determining whether or not a particular step passes or fails. And then within there, you could also have some additional validation as to like what are the sort of things you might see within the homepage. Uh, but again, it's going to heavily depend on the application, feature, whatever you're writing this test case for. Sometimes you don't want to be too generic or too vague in terms of what you're testing against, because that can lead to missed scope, and that would, in that sense, it would be you don't have the coverage where you're making sure that all the places you care about are or aren't being checked. So you wouldn't want to, like, say, navigate to the homepage, but then you don't have anything that any like additional test cases to uh check additional things within the homepage, or doing any sort of additional validation. Some people make individual test cases that are very granular, and you'll have like lots and lots of test cases where each one is like a specific thing of like, do this thing, does it do that thing, and then that's the test. Others, you might have more of like what's considered end to end, which means you're going through a whole workflow. Like if I were to create a test case for uh, logging out of a page or logging out of an application, I might go through and say, navigate to this app or whatever, um, log in with the credentials, then click on the log out button, confirm the log out, and then validate the additional whatever more is necessary, which might be, are you doing security? Are you needing to like check the security on whether or not the user was really logged out, and do you need to like refresh to see if you need to log back in, or is it something else? So test cases are useful as a way to track your coverage of like the tests that are being ran. You have a concrete list of things that have to be checked, however frequently you run those test cases, which that you can get into all sorts of things with like regression tests or regression testing, where you're going back through to make sure that nothing has gotten worse, or like functionality that used to work now no longer works. So you can use test cases to help provide, I mean, it's like going to a uh, a grocery store with your list of items you want to pick up. You you want that concrete list so that things aren't missed. Now, there's there's a whole other conversation that could be had about the human element, and whether or not the steps are fully being ran, or if they're fully being uh, properly validated. Because, again, if you, even with granular test cases, you could get into an instance where you uh, something is able to be interpreted differently than how it was written. So you could easily get into situations where what you think that you wrote was very clear is actually not clear at all. And so that can cause all sorts of problems. And that's where that's a whole other conversation as to like language. How do you write steps and how do you communicate ideas between doing something and checking something? If I were to write down, click on this thing, move down to here, and you should see this specific text, then like how common are those words that are being used as to the language? Is there a particular name for the area that would be more helpful to say like the the text within this input field or this those types of things would then be something to think about and address as to whether or not you need to work on your uh, language used in the steps for test cases, or also known as test steps.